This is a revised edition of my video entitled Proud to be Neanderthal. I am publishing this because some very misguided person caused my original video to be restricted on YouTube, and someone at YouTube allowed a misguided person to have his or her way. I have not changed any of the original content, and the original is still up on YouTube for comparison. I don't see how my version of events that happened 50,000 years before recorded history can be considered hate speech. In this talk, I refer to the people who lived in Europe prior to 70,000 years ago as Neanderthal, and the migration that came out of Africa 60,000 years ago as Africans. As both groups are ancestors to modern Europeans and Asians, I don't see how my perspective on prehistory interactions can be considered hate speech to people without Neanderthal DNA. For example, one possibility for the end of Neanderthals could have been widespread homosexuality. So if some homosexual was offended by stating that homosexuals don't produce biological children, would this be hate speech against homosexuals? I don't think so. People of recent African descent, such as less than 300 years ago, that are interested in higher thought such as math, science, or philosophy probably have just as much aptitude as people of recent European and/or Asian descent. I don't have the statistics as to the percentages of persons who are interested in higher thought by racial groups. So, I'm proud to be a Neanderthal. This idea may sound strange to many people, but when asked my race, although of European descent, I put other. One can claim to be of a specific race if they have 1/60th racial ancestry. Thus, if I have 2% Neanderthal DNA, I can claim to be a Neanderthal. The belief that our African ancestors drove the Neanderthal into extinction because of superior intelligence is totally false. The Neanderthal and Denisovan genome is very much alive in modern humanity. And if there was ever any difference in intelligence between the African subspecies and the Euro-Asian subspecies of Homo sapiens, it would have been the larger-brained Neanderthals who were more intelligent. The difference between the Neanderthals being a different race and a subspecies is the length of time separation. 500,000 years of separation would make a subspecies. The West European, the African, and East Asian groups have less than 50,000 years of separation. Both interracial breeding and intersubspecies breeding is possible. It would probably be possible for modern humans to mate with Homo erectus or even Homo habilis if there were any still living. It has been well documented that Neanderthal DNA accounts for 2% to 4% of the non-African human DNA. Thus, for every 1 billion non-African people, Neanderthals account for 20 to 40 million people. Given that the Neanderthal population was less than 1 million prior to the contact with African migrations into Europe and Asia, the Neanderthal population has prospered during the last 50,000 years. However, the African subspecies has prospered more than the Neanderthal subspecies, and the paternal line of the Neanderthals, the Y chromosome, has died out. The reasons for this are that the lower intellect African subspecies benefited from their exposure to the higher intellect Neanderthal subspecies. Thus, the Neanderthal contribution to humanity is much larger than what genetics alone would indicate. What is likely is that the hybrid Neanderthal African males with Neanderthal fathers grew up among tribes of the African subspecies, as children were usually raised around their mother's clan. These hybrid males were more intelligent and different. Many of these nerds didn't produce sons. Some of these hybrids proved themselves as useful for their intellect. From these hybrids and their descendants, we have the mystics, mathematicians, artists, philosophers, and in modern times, scientists that have advanced humanity over time. It is noteworthy that most human intellectual advances occurred in the same parts of the world as in the Neanderthal range, except for contributions by descendants of recent European and Asian migrations to the New World. We can gather clues about the Neanderthal culture and what led to the Neanderthals developing larger brains than the African subspecies by observing differences between the Euro-Asian and African cultures in modern times. I think that in some time the Neanderthal Denisovan history, voluntary human sacrifice was practiced for religious reasons. There are modern religions that practice ritual cannibalism based on voluntary sacrifice. There are also differences in sexual practice. The celibate or childless intellectual is still a valuable part of the human experience. Prime examples are men like Isaac Newton, Jesus Christ, and many of the Christian saints. The Catholic and Orthodox churches actively seek out such personality types for their clergy. This trait is more epigenetic than genetic. There are also subtle math-based influences, which I consider to be spiritual, that I've researched and hope to publish one day when computers with artificial intelligence become sophisticated enough to use these. On the epigenetic level, cigarette smell is very toxic. Persons with this trait who tolerate the smell of cigarette smoke tend to become drug addicted and or criminal instead of productive intellectuals. I believe that the time has come such that Neanderthals enjoy the respect we deserve. And just a few comments about YouTube restrictions. YouTube claims that they have a fair appeal process to video restrictions. However, limiting explanations to 250 characters is woefully inadequate. I had to add 6 paragraphs to this video to explain myself. When some misguided person complains because they don't understand what they are hearing, and then YouTube rubber stamps their objections, something is wrong. The intent of this video is to acknowledge Neanderthals as the source of most of the higher thought within the human species, for the purpose of providing a focal point toward the advancement of higher thought. This is to benefit persons with or without Neanderthal DNA. Although persons with Neanderthal DNA probably have an advantage concerning developing the interest in higher thought, I would like to see more persons on this planet develop higher thought, regardless of race. The fact that 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals of Europe and Asia had evolved more intelligence than other humans living in Africa is not hate speech. It's an observed fact. In the modern world with global communications, this difference so long ago should be almost irrelevant. Thank you so much for listening to my video.